The records were never meant to be found. They were tucked inside the hollowed-out spine of a King James Bible, hidden in a cellar hole in Edgefield District, South Carolina, for 175 years. It was a small, leather-bound ledger, the edges charred by a fire that had long since gone cold. The leather was cracked, smelling of damp earth and old tobacco. Inside, written in a cramped, rhythmic hand, were the names of 38 children, born between the years 1832 and 1851. To a casual observer, it looked like a simple birth record, but when a historian discovered the book in 2024 and began to turn the brittle pages, he noticed a recurring symbol, a small, inked circle, next to 12 specific entries. At first, the historian assumed these circles were marks of tragedy, stillbirths, yellow fever, the common, heartbreaking exits of the 19th century, but as he cross-referenced the names in the Bible with the burial records of the nearby plantation, the timeline broke. The dates didn't align. The burial plots didn't exist. The truth was far more chilling than a simple tragedy. These 12 children hadn't died. They had been erased. They had been removed from the world by the very woman who brought them into it. This is the story of Sarah, mother Thorne, an enslaved midwife who stood at the threshold of life and death, and the 12 secrets she carried into the Georgia soil. It is a story of a woman who realized that in the antebellum South, sometimes, the only way to save a child was to make sure the world believed they never existed. Before we walk down the red clay road to the Black Oaks plantation, I want to ask you to prepare yourself. This is not a story of battles or generals. It is a story of silence. It is a story of the decisions made in the dark, where the difference between a crime and a miracle is often just a matter of perspective. If you believe that history should be preserved, no matter how dark the chapter, please take a moment to subscribe. We are building a library of the forgotten, and we need you to help us keep the lights on. Now, let us return to the autumn of 1851. Let us go to a place where the air was thick with humidity and the smell of indigo, where a bell was ringing, and a woman was preparing for a birth that would bring the entire plantation to its knees. To understand the magnitude of Sarah Thorne's secret, you must first understand the world that necessitated it. The Black Oaks plantation was a sprawling kingdom of cotton and sorrow, owned by the Sterling family since the late 1700s. By 1851, the master of the house was Elias Sterling. Elias was not a man of temper. He was a man of arithmetic. He was part of a new generation of planters who viewed the operation not as a feudal lord, but as a factory manager. His ledger was his god. He tracked every pound of cotton, every barrel of molasses, and every increase in his human property, with the same cold mathematical precision. To Elias Sterling, a birth in the quarters wasn't a miracle. It was a return on investment. It was compound interest in human form. The year 1851 is critical here. Just 1 year prior, the United States Congress had passed the Fugitive Slave Act. This law turned the entire country into a hunting ground. Even if a person managed to escape the chains of the South and reach the free states of the North, they were not safe. Federal marshals could seize them in Boston or Philadelphia and drag them back to the cotton fields. The mood in the quarters was one of suffocating despair. The door to freedom hadn't just closed. It had been bolted shut. In this atmosphere of hopelessness lived Sarah Thorne. By 1851, Mother Thorne was 60 years old. In the hierarchy of the plantation, she held a position of immense, terrifying power. She was a granny midwife. To the white masters, she was a necessary utility. Physicians were expensive, and they often lived days away by horse. A skilled midwife protected the master's capital. She kept the workforce alive. But to the enslaved community, she was something else entirely. She was the gatekeeper. She knew the properties of every root in the swamp. She knew which moss would pack a wound to stop the bleeding. And she knew which tea, brewed from the roots of the cotton plant, would prevent a life from beginning at all. She had delivered every child on the Sterling estate for 20 years. Her hands, rough and scarred from decades of labor, were the first things a newborn felt. Her voice was the first sound they heard. The white family trusted her because she was efficient. The enslaved family trusted her because she was their only shield against the cruelty of the overseer's whip and the auction block. Sarah lived alone in a cabin at the edge of the property, near the cypress swamp. It was a strategic location. It gave her access to the herbs she needed, but it also gave her privacy. The overseers rarely ventured that close to the stagnant water, fearing the miasma of fever. In that cabin, Sarah Thorne lived a double life. By day, she was the dutiful midwife, reporting births and health checks to Elias Sterling. She would stand on the back porch of the big house, head bowed, listing the names of the new bobbies. But by night, she was the architect of a conspiracy so dangerous that a single whisper could have led to a mass execution. The investigation into Mother Thorne began, not with a scream, but with a scratch of a pen. In October 1851, a census taker named Milton Vance arrived at Black Oaks. Milton Vance was a man who would have been forgotten by history, if not for his obsession with detail. He was a bureaucrat of the highest order, a man who found comfort in columns and rows. He had been hired by the county to conduct a special audit of taxable property in the Edgefield district. Vance was not a cruel man in the traditional sense. He didn't carry a whip. He carried a ledger, and in many ways, that ledger was more dangerous than any weapon. He set up his office in the library of the Sterling house, surrounded by leather-bound books he would never read. His job was to cross-reference Elias Sterling's private tax records with the physical occupants of the slave quarters. He was looking for tax evasion. He was looking for discrepancies in the numbers. For 3 days, the scratching of his quill was the only sound in the library. He counted the men. He counted the women. He counted the mules, and then he reached the section on natural increase, the children. He found a gap. According to the birth registries that Mother Thorne was required to report to the overseer, a woman named Martha had given birth to a son in 1848. The boy was listed as healthy and strong at birth, but in the 1851 audit, the boy was nowhere to be found. Vance checked the sale records. Elias Sterling was a meticulous record keeper. If he had sold the child, there would be a bill of sale. There was none. Vance checked the death certificates. If the child had died of a fever or an accident, the plantation doctor, Dr. Anson, would have signed a note to verify the loss of value. There was no note. Puzzled, Vance summoned the overseer, a brutal man named Silas Cobb. When Vance asked about the boy from 1848, Cobb shrugged. "That one," Cobb said, spitting tobacco into a brass spittoon. "He faded, just faded in the night. It happens. Weak blood." Faded was a common term in the 19th century for sudden infant death syndrome or general failure to thrive. It was an accepted part of life. Vance might have ignored it if it were an isolated incident. He might have closed his book and moved on to the next plantation. But Milton Vance was a man who noticed patterns. He went back to the ledger. He went back 5 years, then 10, then 15. As he turned the pages, a cold realization began to settle in his stomach. He found another child, a girl born in 1845, who had faded 3 days after birth, then another in 1842, then another. Over an 18-year period, 12 children born under Mother Thorne's care had vanished from the records, without a doctor's signature, and without a bill of sale. But the most disturbing detail was not that they had died. It was the description of them before they died. In the initial midwife reports, written by the overseer based on Sarah's word, all 12 bobbies were described as sturdy, loud, large, and healthy. Weak bobbies did not become sturdy, and then die 48 hours later without a sound. The statistical impossibility gnawed at Vance. On neighboring plantations, the infant mortality rate was high, yes, but it was consistent. The deaths were usually from lockjaw or fever, and they happened over weeks. At Black Oaks under Sarah Thorne, the deaths were sudden, absolute, and always happened within 2 days of birth. Vance closed the ledger. He didn't tell Elias Sterling immediately. Instead, that evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line and the air turned cool, Vance walked down to the slave cemetery. It was a small patch of land near the woods, marked by rough stones and wooden crosses. Vance walked the rows, counting the small mounds of earth that signified a child's grave. He counted and he recounted. According to his list of fated children, there should have been over 40 infant graves from the last 20 years, but the earth told a different story. There were only 28 small mounds. 12 graves were missing. The math didn't add up. 12 children had entered the world, but they hadn't left it through the gates of death. They had simply ceased to exist. Suspicion began to swirl around the small cabin at the edge of the swamp. Vance presented his findings to Elias Sterling on the morning of November 4, 1851. Sterling was initially dismissive. He didn't want to believe that his property was being stolen right from under his nose. He didn't want to believe that an old woman, whom he had trusted with the lives of his own children, was capable of such deception. But the numbers were irrefutable. The realization hit Elias Sterling like a physical blow. He wasn't losing bobbies to the fatting. He was being robbed. But who was taking them? And how were they getting infants off a patrolled plantation without a trace? The answer lay in the very rituals of death that Sarah Thorne supervised. Mother Thorne had developed a system so audacious, so heartbreakingly theatrical, that no white man had ever thought to question it. When a child was born that Sarah deemed ready, perhaps the mother was strong enough, or perhaps there was a contact waiting on the river, she would put her plan into motion. First, she would tell the mother to wail. She instructed them to let a scream rip through the quarters that was so primal, so full of anguish, that it would freeze the blood of anyone who heard it. This was the performance of grief. It convinced the overseer, sitting on his porch half a mile away, that death had visited the cabin. Then Sarah would prepare the body, but there was no body. She would take a bundle of rags, tightly wound. Inside the rags she would place a heavy river stone, warmed by the fire so it felt like flesh through the cloth. She would wrap this child in linen. When the overseer came in the morning to verify the death, he would see a grieving mother clutching a bundled form. He would see Sarah Thorne, somber and professional, nodding her head. He would see the corpse wrapped tight. He never asked to unwrap it. Why would he? He didn't want to see a dead baby. He wanted to leave as quickly as possible. He would mark the ledger, died, loss of property, and he would leave. That night, Sarah and the father would take the bundle of rags and stones to the cemetery. They would dig a hole. They would bury the stone. They would say a prayer not for the dead, but for the living. Because the real child was not in the ground. The real child was hidden in the false bottom of a laundry basket, or tucked into a hollowed-out log in the woodshed, waiting for the signal. Sarah had built a network. It was fragile, made of whispers and moonlight. She used the creekside road, a barely visible deer path that wound through the swamp and connected to the river. There, free blacks working on the riverboats or sympathetic Quakers moving quietly through the South would take the basket. The child would be spirited away, carried north, not as a fugitive but as a ghost. They had no papers because, legally, they didn't exist. They were dead, and no one looks for a dead child. 12 times Sarah Thorne had performed this theater. 12 times she had buried a stone to save a life. But on November 5th, the curtain fell. Elias Sterling, spurred by Vance's numbers, authorized a raid on Mother Thorne's cabin. It happened at dawn. The door was kicked in. The overseer Cobb tore through the room, overturning jars of herbs, ripping open mattresses filled with Spanish moss. Sarah Thorne did not fight. She stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She watched them destroy her home with a strange calmness. She knew this day would come. They found the herbs, they found the clean linens, but then Elias Sterling noticed a loose board near the hearth. He called for a crowbar. The wood groaned as it was pried up. Sterling expected to find stolen coins. He expected to find silver plate taken from the big house. What he found was far more confusing and far more damning. Lying in the dirt beneath the floor were 12 small, hand-carved wooden tokens. They were simple things whittled from pine. One was shaped like a bird, another like a star, another like a small boat. Next to the tokens was a map, drawn in charcoal on the back of a discarded flour sack. The map didn't lead to a treasure, it led to the river. Elias Sterling held the wooden bird in his hand. He looked at Sarah. "Where are they, Sarah?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was trembling. "Where are the children?" Sarah Thorne looked him in the eye. For 20 years she had looked at the ground when she spoke to him. Today, she did not look away. "They are gone, master," she said softly. "They are where you cannot count them." She was arrested and charged with grand larceny, the theft of 12 human beings. The value of the stolen property was estimated at over $5,000, a fortune in 1851. The trial of 1852 was a quiet affair. The Sterling family didn't want the neighborhood to know they had been outsmarted by an elderly woman for 2 decades. It was embarrassing. They wanted it over quickly. Sarah never spoke a word in her defense. The judge asked her to name her accomplices. She remained silent. He asked her where the children had been taken. She remained silent. She knew that if she spoke, the network would collapse. The boatmen, the Quakers, the families in the North, they would all be hunted down. So she took the weight of the secret onto her own shoulders. She was found guilty. Because of her age and her gender, she was not hanged. Instead, she was given a sentence that was intended to be a slow death. She was sold downriver to a sugar plantation in Louisiana. To be sold to sugar was a death sentence. The work was brutal, the heat unbearable. Sarah Thorne disappeared from the records in 1854. There is no marked grave for her. Her body was likely lost to the swamp, just as she had pretended the children were. But Elias Sterling made a mistake. He thought that by selling Sarah, he had destroyed her work. He threw the wooden tokens into the scrap heap. But he didn't find the Bible. The Bible, with the hollowed-out spine, remained hidden in the cellar of the cabin. It stayed there through the Civil War. It stayed there through Reconstruction. It stayed there as the Black Oaks plantation crumbled and was replaced by a highway and a suburban development. It wasn't until 2024 that the Bible was found, and the code was broken. In the 1990s, long before the Bible was discovered, a genealogical project in Ohio began to uncover a strange anomaly. They found a cluster of African American families in the Midwest who all traced their ancestry back to South Carolina, but whose family trees had no beginning. Their ancestors seemed to appear out of nowhere in the 1850s. These families carried a strange tradition. Every year on the birthday of their oldest ancestor, they would carve a small wooden token, a bird, a star, a boat. They didn't know why they did it. It was just something Big Mama or Grandpa had always done. When the historian published the names from Sarah Thorne's Bible, the pieces fell into place. The names in the Bible matched the oral histories of these families. The wooden tokens matched the descriptions in the court records. The Edgefield 12 were not dead, they had grown up. They had married, they had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Today, there are over 300 people alive in the United States who owe their existence to the courage of Sarah Thorne. They are doctors, teachers, mechanics, and mothers. They are the living legacy of a woman who decided that the law was wrong, and that she would rewrite the ledger of life and death with her own hand. Sarah Thorne delivered 38 bobbies at Black Oaks. She saved 26 for the plantation, but she saved 12 for humanity. She was a thief of property, yes, but she was a liberator of souls. As you sit here today in the comfort of the modern world, I want you to look at the shadows in your own room. Think of the silence that Sarah Thorne endured. Think of the terror of the night, the weight of the stone in the rags, and the heartbreaking courage it took to tell a mother, "Give me your child and I will give them a life, but you will never see them again." That is a sacrifice that cannot be measured in a ledger. What do you think of Sarah Thorne's choice? Was it a crime? Or was it the ultimate act of love? We want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the hidden heroes of our past, please share it. History is not just what is written in books, it is what is hidden in the hearts of the brave. This has been a journey into the shadows. Thank you for listening. We will see you in the next chapter of the history. You were never meant to know. Please subscribe.